Hello, BookTube. A while ago, I embarked on a project on this channel where we go back in time to the very beginning of these videos, thousands of videos ago, and I go through all of the new books that I've received, one by one, and give you feedback on them rather than just let them hang there as open questions. I'm calling it TBR TBR, and we are up to number 11. We're still in 2016. It's kind of weird to go back and look at those videos. It really is. Not just for the fact that the dogs that are in those videos are no longer here. They've been gone for years. That's so amazing to me. If you'd have told me then that you will survive the death of your basset hound Lucy, and that years later you'll be just fine, you'll be happy every day, I wouldn't have believed it. I said it on those videos. I said there's only one thing that will stop me from making BookTube videos, and it's her death, and it didn't. It didn't stop me from doing that. And the thing that almost stopped me from doing it is in this particular period when you're looking back at these videos, and that was the controversy that erupted on my channel out of a Last Week in BookTube episode. And one of you very patiently showed me how to look at these older videos in sequence, just in a stack, and it's hilarious to watch. You look at the views on the videos, and it's 900, 800, 500, 1100, and then one of them has 18,000, and it's that one. It's that one because a hate mob drove a ton of traffic to that video. But we're on TBR TBR number 11. When Frida was, oh God, her mother would have been a puppy at this time, and I'm not doing as many of these as I kind of want to. We're never going to catch up if I don't increase the pace. So for this one, I put in a lot of books, and that's not as cruel or as shortchanging as it might seem at first, because a lot of these are unremarkable, and that makes sense. That is to be expected, right? most books that come out, most new books that come out, are ultimately unremarkable. Most of them are, despite the hosannas of praise that they tend to get. All of them tend to get from my critical brethren. Most of them are not worth writing about at all, and time only reinforces that when I look back at these. So you're going to get that verdict quite a bit, and I'm not going to dwell on a lot of those. It seems a little cruel, for an author, for a 4-year-old book, to say, well, to dig up the corpse and say you weren't all that special. Seems a little cruel. So, like for instance, the first one here is The First Circumnavigators by Harry Kelsey, which is a history of exactly what the title says, and it didn't do anything for me. It didn't jump off the page at all. The second one is the History and Uncertain Future of Handwriting by Anne Trubek. I was irritated by the idea of this book when I opened it, and I'm still irritated even though I've read it. It has a bit of fine writing in it, but I mean, the history of handwriting, of cursive writing, is interesting on its own, but the elements of the book that lament that it's disappearing fell on deaf ears. It can't disappear fast enough for me. Then the next one was Life and Work by Tim Parks. You would think this would be right up my alley. It's a book about reading and writing and critical reception. That's the kind of thing that would end up in this room. But it was a boring example of that, so we can just pass over it. Same thing with the next one, The Gilded Cage by Judy, a self-published historical novel. I'll leave all these listed down below so you can look it up, and if the details interest you, if the time period interests you and you don't really care about anything else, then maybe this would be of interest to you to order. I'm sure the author would be grateful for it. I just didn't think the execution was anything to write home about. Now, we have an exception here in Lost Among the Birds by Neil Hayward, a book about not really him being lost among the birds, but rather him being lost among the birders, that wretched and diseased portion of humanity that goes out in all weathers with binoculars on a life list. They have their own vocabulary. Now they have their own websites, their own webcams, their own apps. They are a strange group. I know a couple of them. They are a strange group. Ultimately harmless, but nevertheless, such an obvious and uncontrolled obsession is a little bit on the creepy side. And this book is wonderful, just wonderful. I think I said at the time that if you know a birder, you really should get this book for them. They'll probably have it on their own, but if you are a birder, even so, this is a delight. Don't know if it's still in print. Don't know if it ever got a paperback. Then we have the year's best science fiction. This is the 33rd edition by the late Gardner Dozois, who did 2 more of these. I think he got up to 35 or 36, something like this. These are massive anthologies of science fiction short stories that have been published in the previous year. assembled by Dozois, who read voluminously everywhere to go and find these things. You've actually seen quite a few of these volumes on this channel in 2020, because during quarantine, one of my favorite things to order online was science fiction anthologies of short stories, and Gardner Dozois is at the top of that list. Like in so many cases, I tended to disparage these things when they were still a living thing amongst us. It's only now that that is ended that I realize how incredibly special they were. I shouldn't have, I mean, not to give it a free pass critically, but I shouldn't have been quite so cynical about them as I was when they were appearing, because they're amazing. Even the ones I don't agree with, even when there are volumes where Dozois always writes a long overview of the year that was. Many was the year that I thought that overview was bloated and complacent and maybe even a little unknowing. And there were many years where his selections, where I was quibbling with some of his selections, I was saying, because I read a lot of science fiction short stories in periodical too, not nearly as much as he did, but I would look back on the period that the anthology covers, and I would say, but what about this story? That was one of the best ones I read that year, and it's not in here. It's not even an honorable mention. That kind of stuff, that kind of dialogue, sometimes peppy, is going to be natural with any anthology series. I should have loved these things more when they were around than I did. But 33 was just like all the others in that it was incredibly muscular, incredibly wide-ranging. A value for the money is what the point I should have been making all along with these things, is that it was a steal for what you got. Then the next one was What Elephants Know by Eric Dinerstein, a novel that you think would be right up my alley about a boy who's raised by dogs and then educated by elephants. Didn't really do anything for me, just sort of sat there. Next one was a thin work of nonfiction, Who Rules the World by Noam Chomsky. Those of you who know Noam Chomsky's 20 or so talking points will be able to predict this book right down to terminology, and you won't be wrong. The answer that Noam Chomsky, since he was 12, the answer that Noam Chomsky has given to the question, who rules the world, has always been the wrong people. The exact wrong people. Only the wrong people. If you're into that, he has a certain kind of inexorable eloquence to him. If you're into that, then this book will be more of the same. There are Chomsky completists even today, and I believe that he might die in 2020, which will cause his work spotlight to be thrown on all of his works. I know some Chomsky completists, people who get every book. If you're one of those, you won't have missed this. If you're not, and you're wondering if you missed anything extraordinary in his oeuvre, you did not. Then the 50-Year Mission, Volume 1, and a massive oral history of Star Trek. This one covering the original show and giving just where the editors just go and find anyone who's still alive and ransack the oral history records and combine them into what will certainly be the starting point for any definitive oral history of Star Trek. It's just amazing. A little bit illusion shattering, of course, as such things will be when you're reading descriptions of these are working actors, and they didn't know they were working on something that was culturally immortal. They thought it was just a TV show. It was a good job to get. And that's a little bit deflating at times. No one really, except for Roddenberry himself, had any vision involved with Star Trek, and this hammers that home. But it's fascinating to read. Again, a must for Star Trek fans. Then we have The Last Days of Stalin by Joshua Rubenstein. This is well-trod ground, and this book is energetic but not memorable on the subject. So we move on to The Gold Hunter by Phillip Atlas Clausen. Same thing. I believe it's self-published historical fiction. You can read up on it. Go and look it up. Sometimes I know some people who don't, when it comes to very specific subjects, they are completist, and they don't, because they're completist on the subject, they don't really care about the execution all that much. Like if you are buying everything on Jack the Ripper, then if there's a boring book, you're still going to have it. So you might want to look at this and see if it suits you. Then a history called 1956 by Simon Hall, one of those keyhole histories that focuses on 1 year. I think those things they're structurally weak. They can't help but be, and this is no exception to that rule. It's again largely unmemorable. It's all of the, if you know the events of the year, the author doesn't do anything different with that keyhole approach. It doesn't wow you at all. It didn't wow me anyway. Then we move on to Stories from the Leopold Shack, Sand County Revisited by Estella Leopold, and this is just Leopoldiana. This is ephemera around Sand County Almanac. So diehard fans of Sand County Almanac will want this book, absolutely. Although I have to point out, sorry, this is a bit of a downer of a TBR TBR. I have to point out that the book Sand County Almanac casts a magic that is undimmed by a century since it came out, and that has nothing to do with this book. So this book is for completists. It's for people who are interested in everything about the book and the world of the author, rather than just the magic of the book. Then one that is probably the most famous thing on this list, Grief is a Thing with Feathers. Max Porter's debut. Slim little thing that's sort of quasi-prose poetry in its tone and approach. I liked it for what it did. I think ultimately it doesn't try to do too much. Maybe that's a blessing. I think it showed, I know this hackneyed thing for a critic to say about a debut, but it showed an enormous amount of promise. I wasn't just over the moon and out into the galaxy about it like every other critic who drew breath back in 2016, but I still liked it. Then we have Beige by Ci'Monique Green, another self-published historical novel. Again, I will leave the title down below so that if the subject matter interests you. But believe me, if it were if any of these were truly extraordinary self-published historical novels, I wouldn't be passing them over. I'd be singing their praises, because I love self-published authors, indie authors. I want to see the exemplary work in that world get noted and get a readership. This was, in my opinion, kind of boring, so you can read up on it and see if you agree. Same thing with The Stein House by Mira Hargrave MacIlvenny, and also Finding the Raven by Patty Dixon Pixa. I will leave the details of these things down below so that you can go and look them up yourself. But at the time, I was the editor of the Historical Novel Review Online, so I got a steady stream of self-published historical novels to Hyde Cottage all the time. I got a steady stream of those every week. And I hate to say it, I mean, I wish that it weren't true, but out of, say, 20 of those books, any given 20 of those books, one would be really good, would be superb, would be something I would recommend to anyone. Not just good for indie publishing, but just forget about that distinction where it's just fantastic. 1 out of 20. Those are pretty tough odds. I want to stress, I'm not beating up on the indie publishing branch, because those odds are true, or if anything worse, in the mainstream publishing branch. It's just, you have to keep that in mind. That's all. These books are all the products of a personal, private dream, but that doesn't save them. That doesn't automatically validate their worth. So can we find something that maybe isn't that? Okay, The Unknown Universe by Stuart Clark is next. Popular science, but unmemorably done. Then The Cavendon Luck by Barbara Taylor Bradford, historical fiction, but this done by an old pro. Very, very predictable stuff, and a little bit flat for this author. Ordinarily, I'm used to giving her about 20 pages to find her pacing, like a thoroughbred, and then she's off, and it's peppy after that. And this book was not, and this series has not been, so I'm not really sure what accounts for that. Then Serious Sweet by A.L. Kennedy, a very good contemporary writer. Serious Sweet didn't do anything for me, but A.L. Kennedy fan might be working on a different wavelength and like it a lot more than I did. And finally, Ice Station Nautilus by Rick Campbell, which I think is one of the only books on this entire list that I reviewed. And it's a Clancy-esque military action political thriller, very competently done, with all of the silliness that implies. I mean, it's an inherently silly genre, but readers know that. I assume that readers know that. So if you're ready for that, then that's what you'll get. That is definitely what you'll get. It won't embarrass you. It'll be well worth your time. Probably Ice Station Nautilus has a paperback. Probably it had a paperback. I don't know if I'm blurbed on that paperback, but one way or another, probably you can get it for very cheap if you like this sort of thing. And that leaves us, that is the whole of this TBR TBR number 11. Lots and lots of dead weight, in my opinion, that you would have to assess for yourself. There is still a bean of the batch, a pick of the litter, and that is the Gardner Dozois volume. That'd be the one that sticks out in my mind when I look over these 20 books, is that one by far. the sheer amount of work and effort, the sheer amount of love that went into collecting those volumes every year. I don't know that we'll see its like in future anthology series. I always say that, but I said that when Terry Carr died. But nevertheless, this was a massive thing, and it was a huge amount of a huge gesture of faith on the part of the publisher to give him 700 pages. That for an anthology series, that was a huge vote of faith on the part of the publisher. I'm glad they did it. Each volume was an event. Each volume was lavish, and they're all worth your time. So that is your TBR TBR for today. I'll try and do another one of these on the weekends so that we can try to catch up just a little. So we'll reconvene then and hope that maybe that one has a few more crackerjack things on it than anything in this one. So until then, I will wrap this up, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.